they need to be able to identify transference of addiction. If they have a loved one that's in the recovery process and they may not be using, let's say if they're an alcoholic, they may not be using alcohol, but you may notice that they have begun to overconsume in doing something else. For example, eating.
Right. Welcome to Mission Driven. I'm Derek.
And I'm Brother A.
Mission Driven is here for us to provide you with information and resources so that you may be able to identify those around you that may be struggling with life-debilitating addictions. We are a Christ-based organization that works with addicts every day. Brother A, today we're going to be talking about addiction transference.
Correct.
So what does that mean? And let's go from there. First off, what does it mean?
Okay, Derek. Well, first of all, excited to be conducting another podcast. And, of course, we're still staying in the same vein of relapse prevention because that's vital, particularly with where we are with this opioid crisis and the drug epidemic and where this country is going with the legalization of marijuana. And, a lot of things are happening in our nation that I think it's really important that we focus on relapse prevention.
Right.
Addiction is categorized as or defined as the continued use of a substance or behavior despite the potential for personal problems or negative consequences. In other words, if you are practicing a behavior or if you're using a chemical substance and it is causing negative consequences or difficulties in your life, but yet you continue to use it, you are classified as an addict.
Okay.
And so it's important for us to talk about addiction transference, or it's also referred to as cross addiction.
Okay.
Many times the addict may have multiple addictions and may not necessarily be aware completely that they have multiple addictions. Usually that's due to the fact that the primary addiction has so dominated their lives and caused so many problems in their lives that they were unable to see that they actually have multiple addictions until they begin the recovery process when they're recovering from drugs and alcohol, whatever the addictive behavior is. You've heard me talk about it before, but addiction falls into two categories.
Right.
Substance and behavioral.
Right.
And so, many times I think we try and separate the substance and only focus on it as an addiction. And there's clear evidence that the behavioral addictions are just as destructive as the substance addictions. But however, for whatever reason, our society tends to only focus or primarily focus on the substance issues. So oftentimes when an individual is in recovery or addicted to a substance, specifically when you're talking about somebody that's addicted to a substance in recovery, and say let me define first of all what transference of addiction is. Transference of addiction is when an addiction to one thing is replaced with an addiction to another.
Okay.
It's a common example. Here's a common example of addiction transference is the replacement of smoking with a compulsive overeating.
Okay.
Overeating behavior.
Okay.
That happens a lot. I see it happen a lot in our program, an Adult and Teen Challenge. Men tend to come into the program and they have to go cold turkey from not only their drug of choice, but also if they were a smoker, and many of them are, the large percentage of them are that come into the program, smokers, they go cold turkey from those things. That ends up transferring into eating.
Okay.
So on average, we get a guy, he he gains about 65 pounds through the program due to eating. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking. That's an example of what we're talking about when we're talking about transference of addiction.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, it's also known as cross addiction. It's when a person has an addiction to two or more addictive substances or behaviors.
Okay.
So, for example, a person might be addicted to gambling.
Okay.
But they also might have a sex addiction.
Right.
And so that would be considered also cross addiction. They may have been addicted to opioids for a number of years. They're clean and sober, and then all of a sudden they start drinking alcohol, and they become an alcoholic.
Right.
So they've transferred that. There's the transference of addiction. Okay.
So basically, I mean, really, that last example is really good, because I think a lot of people, they'll be clean, and then all of a sudden something happens, but they're not getting addicted to the original drug, but they're getting addicted to, like you said, alcohol or something like that. And so how does one maybe keep that from happening?
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's important for not only the recovering addict, but for the loved ones of a recovering addict. They need to be able to identify transference of addiction. If they have a loved one that's in the recovery process, and they may not be using, let's say if they're an alcoholic, they may not be using alcohol, but you may notice that they have begun to overconsume in doing something else. For example, eating.
Right.
That's an indication that they have transferred addiction, and that they need help. So if you identify that, the first thing to do is to help them identify with it as well.
Right. So I'm just out of curiosity, would Teen Challenge be a program for somebody that has an addiction to food? Or is that something that we wouldn't even deal with here?
Yeah, right. So we would likely refer that person to someone who actually works with people who deal with food addiction.
Okay.
Now, addiction is addiction.
Right.
However, but primarily we focus on substance use. Obviously, we deal with individuals that have multiple addictions. So, but the primary thing that comes into our program is substance abuse,
okay.
Alcoholism.
Right.
And so what happens though is, as they're getting clean and in recovery from, say, alcohol or drug addiction, then they're able to identify also that I got some other issues that are or addictions that are behavioral related, and so the process for that, is still the same as far as recovering.
Right. So if a gentleman came here for substance abuse addiction, and in the process of him getting clean ends up picking up doing a transference to food addiction, mm-hmm. we would start kind of address that while they're in the program itself too.
Correct. The hard thing for with that one is, it's hard for people to identify that that's an addiction. They conclude, I just like to eat.
Yeah, I sometimes I resemble that remark.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with liking to eat.
Right.
Liking to eat, but you have to have balance.
Right.
You have to be health conscious and considering your health in it. And if you are overindulging, matter of fact, the scriptures even speak of that and refers to it as what? Gluttony.
Right.
But also the scripture encourages us. I want to say, I said encouraging, but it really admonishes us to do everything in moderation.
Right.
And I see guys in here, and they're oblivious to it a lot of times. They're not aware necessarily that they've transferred their addiction to food.
Right.
They get the mindset, well, hey, I like to eat.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if they reflect back on where they were in their addiction, they weren't eating.
That's right.
Like that.
Right.
They were barely eating.
Right.
We rarely get guys in here that was really focused on eating right and eating properly that were while they were in their addiction.
Right. This goes back to what we've talked about many times. The addiction becomes, or what you're addicted to becomes primary.
Correct.
And so everything else just falls to the wayside.
Right.
So food and all that, your nutrition,
Right.
all that does that.
Right.
So, but if you know somebody that is struggling with addiction and maybe even might be seeing some transference of some type, give us a call at 833-462-8286 or visit us online at atctn.org and click on that Get Help button right there, and somebody will get back with you within 24 hours. So with this transference, what is the best way for a loved one to really keep an eye out for anything that, because after they've come out of recovery, what should they be watching for, really? I mean, I know we talked about briefly an oversessive or something, but is there anything else they should be looking out for?
I think the first thing is to be conscious that I can transfer my addiction to something else, even food. And you know, the thing with food is it's not often looked at as a negative thing.
Right.
Is looked at as, hey, you know, I should eat. I'm supposed to eat.
Right.
And not looking at how, and which causes you not to be aware when you transfer your addiction to food. Right. You start being aware that you're eating too much at some point because you start putting on a whole lot of weight or whatever the case may be. But you may not be aware that, hey, I've transferred my addiction to this. So the first thing is for them to realize that that's what has happened. Now, it doesn't just relate to food. It could be to sex.
Right.
You could have transferred your addiction to that, and you have to be conscious of that. If you're working a spiritual program of recovery, you should be aware of that, and look at how do I address that? Well, you address it just like you're addressing the substance abuse issue. You have to be working that program of recovery. You got to be spiritual recovery. You got to be honest about it, and you got to have accountability in helping you to overcome now your food addiction.
Right, and that's what I was about to ask about is accountability. So, what would be the best way for somebody to look for that accountability once they're out of recovery and they start realizing this is happening? Or the loved one, how should one go about getting that accountability?
Well, if they have a wife or a spouse, that would be idea to make themselves accountable for them in whatever area it is. If it's a behavioral thing, if it has went from substance use to alcohol use, making yourself accountable for that, and realize, you know, the thing with people with addictive tendencies is that they tend to simply go to extremes in with everything. And there's a such thing as, you know, we call it positive addictions.
Right.
But at the same time, you still have to have balance even with that. You know, you know, I like going to the gym. I like working out, and I can go to extremes with it. So, but I have to learn. I have to teach myself to balance that, because if I don't, what may be a positive addiction can become something negative, because you end up injuring yourself, or you're spending way too much time doing it.
Right.
Television, we don't talk about that one much.
No, and technology, all those different things, different addictions.
Yeah.
Maybe even seeing kids getting addicted to video games.
Yeah, that's a big one today.
Yeah, so
gaming.
there's just a lot of different types of addictions. And like I really like how you've broken it down as to substance and behavioral.
Yeah.
Because, and like you said, a lot of times the behavioral is the one that we don't ever look at.
Right.
But both of them are can be very harmful. And if you know somebody that is struggling with any type of addiction and you're looking for help, reach out to us, 833-462-8286, or visit us online at atctn.org and just click on that Get Help button, and we will get back with you and we will help you. If we can't help you, we'll find some place that you might be able to get help with and give you some recommendations. Yeah. So, Brother A, I just really thank you for showing us these things today. And it really does open our minds and just seeing what other types of things happen through the recovery program and what to really look for.
Right.
So I just really appreciate that. So once again, this has been Mission Driven, and this has been a production of Adult and Teen Challenge of Heartland. Remember, there is freedom from being free from your addictions.